All right. Looks like we're live. Good afternoon, everybody. Chuck Holton here, coming to you from my studio in Panama. This weekend, air travel on both sides of the Atlantic looked like it had been scripted by Kafka. In Europe, hackers crippled Collins's. Why am I getting on a group voice call here? In Europe, hackers they hit this Collins Aerospace passenger check-in system, which is being used all over the place. And so London Heathrow, Brussels, the airport in Berlin, giant airports we're just running on pencils and paper, and flights stacked up, delays spiraled out of control, and passengers were sitting marooned in departure lounges. Somebody keeps trying to call me on WhatsApp. We're going to have to turn that off. Hang on just a second. Put it on do not disturb. Do not disturb. There we go. Uh, Thank you for watching, everybody. So as I was talking about this ransomware hit on uh, airports in Europe. As a matter of fact, I have a little short package about that. If you want to see what that looks like, take a look.
So what's happening is that one of our external service providers, who provide us with a system for passenger check-in and boarding, was hit by a cyber attack last night. This is impacting Brussels Airport, but also other European airports. What we're seeing this morning is that there's still no solution yet.
So they are still dealing with the fallout of that ransomware attack. We haven't heard where it came from exactly, but we can make some guesses. We're going to do that later. Here at home, U.S. air traffic controllers weren't spared either. The FAA blamed fiber cuts and technical issues around Dallas, but the timing, which was right while the airports in Europe were fighting off their ransomware attacks, made plenty of people wonder if there was more to that story. Officials, of course, are sticking to the familiar line: no evidence of a cyber attack, which in political speak usually translates to either we don't know yet or we wouldn't tell you even if we did. So if that weren't enough, there's a brand new report out from the National Counterterrorism Center that just dropped this week that Tim Miller did a great video about that you should go take a look at. And that is warning that al-Qaeda is actively calling for fresh attacks inside the United States, naming government officials and urging its followers to perform shootings, bombings, and even ramming cars into protests or gatherings. And that's after years of playing in the background. Al Qaeda is now trying to shove itself back into the spotlight. So, between airports crashing from ransomware and terror groups putting out how to guides to perform attacks on the United States, it's starting to feel like every system we're on, planes, power, and even the political realm, is sitting on glass legs. And all these cyber shenanigans really highlight the importance of keeping some cash on hand, or maybe even gold. Because, when the ATMs go down and your cards won't swipe and the internet's gone dark, digital money, it's just numbers on a dead screen, and you're not going to be able to even get a cup of coffee at a gas station with all the money in the world. Gold just shattered records, more than $3,700 an ounce. They say it could go as high as 5,000 an ounce. We're right now at the highest in history. It's a 33% gain this year, and that's more than 3.5 times the Standard and Poor's 500. Meanwhile, Washington is out here devaluing the dollar like it's a hobby. Now, I was reading Proverbs 11, and it says, a false balance is an abomination to the Lord, but a just weight is his delight. And fiat currency, the kind that we use every day as cash, is the modern version of false balances, dishonest scales that rob your savings while pretending to be fair. Gold is just the opposite. It's tangible, tested, and trusted across the centuries. So if you don't already, we'll go over here. If you don't already have physical gold in your portfolio, you're late, but you're not too late. My friends over at Preserve Gold are making it simple, whether you want coins in your hand or a fully insured gold IRA. They'll walk you through every step with no pressure, no gimmicks, and no awkward sales pitches that sound like late night infomercials. So do me a favor, call Preserve Gold today, or I just called them myself today, as a matter of fact, or visit preservegold.com/hotzone. Even better, you can text the word Chuck to 50505. That's my name, Chuck, to 50505 right now to get your free wealth protection guide. Because, like I said, gold is at record highs. Don't trust those false balances. Protect your wealth with honest money. All right. So now, before we get into the increasing cyber threats, here's what U.S. intelligence has put on the table recently. This is something important that, like I said, Tim Miller has been, he pointed out over on his channel. That's gotten almost 100,000 views already, which is huge for him. Al Qaeda, especially its Yemen affiliate, AQAP, has been ramping up its propaganda and recruitment efforts. They're calling for attacks in the homeland. That means in the United States. That's from uh, the National Intelligence Directorate in the United States coming out. As a matter of fact, they released this report. I've got a copy of the report here somewhere. Let's see if I can find that. I got to go over here. Nope, not that one. There we go. Uh, okay, so this report was put out by the National Counterterrorism Center, and you can see here what they're talking about. It says this product it's meant for law enforcement. It's intended to inform federal, state, local, tribal, and territorial government law enforcement and first responders of Al Qaeda's recent calls for attacks against the United States. This just came out. Al Qaeda's resurgence of calls for attacks in the homeland highlights its persistent and enduring threat to the country, U.S. officials, and public safety. Al Qaeda and its Yemeni based affiliate, Al Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, AQAP, the only affiliate to have successfully enabled an attack in the homeland, are likely seeking to leverage their media publications and global conflicts, that's like the war in Gaza, particularly where there is U.S. support or military involvement, to inspire potential attackers. Uh, in mid-July this year, AQAP released the 10th edition of its English language Inspire Guide, the second issue within a month, celebrating recent attacks in the U.S. and calling on its supporters in the homeland to conduct attacks using simple attack methods such as firearms, explosives, knives, vehicle rammings, or Molotov cocktails. The publication highlighted that proper targets were individuals or organizations that support Israel, as well as law enforcement and the government, almost certainly a reference that includes the US government, and that large protests or civil disturbances could be good opportunities to commit an act of terrorism. So that's partially why we saw yesterday's memorial for Charlie Kirk, which was attended by over 100,000 people. Uh, it had Super Bowl level security. I mean, they were not playing around, and everybody had to get go through metal detectors to get into the arena. They actually caught one guy who was armed. He claimed to be law enforcement, but he wasn't, and he was trying to enter the arena with a weapon. So they are uh, taking this stuff very seriously, and you should too. We're going to talk more about what you can do specifically to safeguard you and your family as we go through these threats. Okay, so folks, if you haven't done so already, do me a favor and put where you're watching from in the chat. We'd like to see that. And if you have any questions, put them in all caps with the word question right before the question. And our moderators will take those questions and aggregate them onto a sheet that I can look at a little later in the podcast, and I'll answer all your questions. I'll get to all your questions here shortly. Okay, so like I say, they Al Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula put out two issues in 1 month of their Inspire Guide. There are a lot of Islamist publications we can look at here. These are some examples. Now, I wouldn't recommend going looking for these online if you don't want to get on a list somewhere, but this is what they look like. They're obviously in English, and they are meant to recruit and radicalize young people across the United States. They don't necessarily have to be Muslims. They're just looking for anybody who supports what they're doing, which would be a lot of college kids, a lot of people like the guy who shot uh, a young Jewish couple that was leaving an event in Washington, D.C. They specifically praised him and that event and are calling for more events like that. So the leader of AQAP explicitly called in June for attacks against top U.S. officials like the president, the vice president, the secretary of state, and the secretary of defense, um, members of Congress, their families, and others. Civilian and military targets uh, don't matter. I mean, his messaging kind of blurs the line there, saying there's no distinction. So their literature is encouraging the use of public protests, large gatherings, and civil unrest or disturbances as cover or an opportunity for attacks. So what we're saying here is that as these uh, as the number of protests grows, as we see increasing political violence and rancor, protests across the United States, what you should see when you look at that is not a bunch of college kids, pink haired, uh, you know, they're pink haired idiots that are just useful to the cause of Marxism or anti-Israel sentiment or anything like that. What you should see is an absolute threat because those guys are being trained and recruited to hide in those groups and to either attack those groups or attack from those groups, depending on what the group is. And they've had success at this before. Uh, it is the only Al Qaeda affiliate, like I said, to mount attacks that reach onto U.S. soil in recent years. The themes they're pushing now, law enforcement as a target, aviation, government symbols, economic symbolism, they all mirror plots from earlier years. So their playbook is consistent. So, bottom line from the National Counterterrorism Center is that Al Qaeda has not gone quiet. It's not just maybe someday. They're actually pushing now. They want attacks now, and they're trying to capitalize on the global conflict, the protests, and the areas where the United States involvement is visible, not just in the United States, but against U.S. interests and citizens, even overseas. So they're trying to leverage the optics of unrest. That's what they're doing. All right. Now, let's talk about how this fits into the big picture and why it's so terrifying. We've been talking about state actors like Russia and China and Iran and North Korea that are conducting infrastructure sabotage, supply chain attacks, 0-day exploits, infiltrating into our systems, our power systems, our water systems, our internet and other communication systems, that kind of thing. And that's just one front. Now, Al Qaeda is another front, which is less high tech, less, go cut internet cables under the seabed, and more getting stabby and shooty and rammy, blowing up or symbolic targets, using chaos and division as a force multiplier, right? So, what makes this especially dangerous right now is the low barrier to entry. We don't need a state level actor that is, coordinating these things. Simple weapons inserted into a volatile environment, protests and the divisions in society, equal more potential for lone actors or small cells. Now, messaging and propaganda are feeding off of current events, foreign wars, political unrest in the United States, visible U.S. foreign policy interventions overseas, like the 12-day war in Iran, like what we're doing in the Caribbean right now. And Al Qaeda is directing its supporters. And when we say Al Qaeda supporters, we're also including in that state level actors like Russia and China, okay, because they're tacit supporters of what Al Qaeda's objectives, which is destroying the West. Excuse me. So we're not just talking about terrorists, we're talking about their affiliates and their supporters. And all of them are encouraging and doing what they can to facilitate exploiting these openings. And their targeting is designed for maximum psychological damage. It's targeting symbolic places, government officials, mass gatherings, mass transit. You trying to get home to see grandma for Thanksgiving, that kind of stuff. And it doesn't necessarily need massive infrastructure hacking, like shutting down the whole power grid. These can be terror attacks or that take place in the cyber realm, or mass casualty events like a ramming attack at a parade or something like that. Now, as we come into the holiday season, this needs to be in the forefront of your mind as you are preparing to go home for Thanksgiving or to go visit relatives for Christmas. You need to be thinking about these things and making a few extra plans. We're going to talk more about that in a minute. Okay. So we're not living in fear here. We're just going to be prepared and aware of what is potentially about to happen. Now, again, these are not just state cyber armies and covert infrastructures that are being warred against. Al Qaeda is pushing hard right now for attacks inside the United States, low tech, high impact attacks, weapons, knives, vehicles, public protests. And this is coming out of Yemen. They're publishing, glossy photographed guides on how to do this, showing people how to make Molotov cocktails, because it's not as easy as it sounds. And that's another reason why you shouldn't go looking for these things to see for yourself online, because you don't want to get on a list. Okay. But they're openly calling for hits on U.S. government officials, symbolic targets, and you, civilians. It's not a futuristic threat, it's right now. Okay. So let's talk about what kinds of attacks we are seeing on a day to day basis around the world right now. This is asymmetric warfare. Okay. So the Russians don't need to outbuild us. The Chinese don't need to outfly us, and Iran doesn't need to, out tank us or out missile the United States. Why would they when they can just use a few hackers and cause just as much chaos, if not more? Now, that's what asymmetric warfare is all about. The weak using unconventional tricks to make the strong bleed through 1,000 cuts. It cost us time, it cost us money. Thank you, William. Very kind of you. And it costs us, credibility. So cyber is the perfect weapon for this. You've heard me talk about the incredible proliferation of cybercrime across the globe. It's we talked just the other day about the problems with jurisdiction when it comes to trying to uh, prosecute these crimes, because your local police department doesn't have the jurisdiction to go after somebody in Russia, for example. And Russian authorities could care less if somebody in Russia is scamming you out of your retirement savings in the I'm sorry, scammers in Russia are scamming you out of your retirement savings in the US. All of this is very cheap. Again, very low barriers to entry. Some 17-year-old Nigerian kid is stealing money as we speak from women using. I'm still on my poster page. Okay. Uh, they're stealing money as we speak from some poor woman who thinks she's dating me. I mean, look, there are hundreds of fake profiles out there that are using my pictures that they've stolen off the internet and setting up dating profiles, setting up social media profiles, and commenting on my own videos here, trying to get people to engage with them, and then they try to start a relationship with them and try to get them to send them money. And many times they're successful, and they've been very successful at it. People have lost millions of dollars to skinny Nigerian kids posing as me and getting money out of poor old women who are just lonely or whatever. I mean, look. If you want to donate through the hot zone, that's a great safe way to do that. If you want to donate through locals and help us, with the things that we're doing around the globe to help people, that's great. It's a safe way to do that. If you want to donate through our link tree, all the ones on there are vetted and safe. But if you've got somebody who's using my photograph, contacting you directly and asking you for money, you're being scammed, because I don't contact people directly and ask them for money. People want to join me in what I'm doing. That's great. But I don't ask people to give me money directly. I don't contact you in your DMs and say, hey, could you send me a Apple card or a gift card or something like that. So if you're getting anything like that, you're being scammed. Anyway, $9 trillion a year is what that is costing people around the globe. And again, it's cheap, it's easy to get into, and it's anonymous. And when it works, it makes even the most powerful nations on earth look like they can't figure out how to keep the lights on. So, one of the most dangerous ways that they do that is through what they call 0-day exploits. These are like skeleton keys for the digital age. Hackers love 0-day exploits. It's the software flaw nobody knows about, and not the users, not the developers, not even the poor IT guy who's about to get roasted at the next staff meeting. 0-day exploits are where they dig into the code that runs our modern lives, and they find weaknesses in the code that they can then exploit to, say, steal the personal information of a bunch of clients or a bunch of users or something like that. And we've seen that happen to literally billions of people around the globe. 0-day means zero defenses. It's like somebody discovering a secret passage into your closet in your house that even the architect didn't know about. And they just wait until you are gone on vacation to come in and clean out your jewelry box. That's kind of in a digital realm what we're looking at. Leland, I'll get to your question on Bagram later on if you want to stick around. Thank you for that donation, by the way. Now, governments actually buy these 0-day exploits. When hackers find them, which they're always doing. I mean, they're digging through Microsoft's code. They're digging through the code of the websites of every government website out there. They're digging through the code in your cell phone. I mean, it's just everything. And when they find these 0-day exploits, they can do one of two things. They can go the white hat route, and they can sell them to a government or to the company that owns the website, or they can sell them on the black market. And usually it just depends on who's paying the most money. So they sell these things, and then you only hear about them when your hospital, your bank, or your airline gets taken hostage. Uh, Now it's not just pencil neck geeks in their mom's basements that are doing this. Uh, there are tens of thousands, and probably hundreds of thousands of hackers that are employed by North Korea and China and Russia and Iran. to do this sort of thing. So, for example, Russia turned off Ukraine's power grid twice. They breached Microsoft to steal the source code out of Microsoft, and these are Russian hackers doing this. They run hacking units with names like Sandworm, and that's exactly as charming as it sounds, right? China, they love playing the long game. They're employing groups called Volt Typhoon to penetrate U.S. infrastructure, sit inside there. This is power grids, telecoms, transport, etc., just waiting for the day somebody in Beijing says, flip the switch. Now, we've seen examples of this in the United States, and I've done some reports on this before. I'll see if I can show you a piece of one here real quick. I made a documentary about this at one point. Let's see if I can make this one. Whoop, let's turn that down. This is
It's something most Americans completely take for granted. You flip a switch, the lights come on. Electrical power has become so deeply integrated into our lives, most of us rarely give it a second thought until it goes off. The American power grid has been called the largest machine on Earth, but growing demand on an aging infrastructure means the U.S. grid suffers more blackouts than any other developing country.
Did you know that the U.S. grid suffers more blackouts than any other developing country? Were you aware of that? I'm curious. For those of you, well, if you're in the U.S. or out of the U.S., when was the last time you had a power outage that lasted more than, let's say, a couple hours? Um, and how often does the power go off where you live? Now, here in Panama, we have some extreme weather. Right now is a rainy season, so we get some real serious thunder boomers and things like that. And that knocks out power from time to time. I've got a solar generator sitting right here under my desk and a solar array, like solar system, to charge the thing so that we can keep running if something like that happens. But I mean, the worry about your power grid getting taken down by you know weather event is nothing compared to the problem that you might face if your power grid gets taken out by a non-state actor. Now, one of the things I will put this documentary up for our supporters over at chuckholton.com if you want to watch the whole thing. I can't play it for you here on YouTube because I get demonetized because of the music that's in it. But it's a full-length documentary about the power grid and the cyber threat to the power grid. Now, there was a uh, event that I mentioned in the documentary at the Metcalf substation in Silicon Valley back in 2013, where a group of uh, professionals, let's just say, we don't know who they are, they've never determined who it was that did this, attacked the Metcalf power substation with high powered rifles. Before they shot out the transformers, they got into an underground tunnel and cut the communications cables from the Metcalf station so that they couldn't call out and report the emergency. And then they set up in the middle of the night using night vision scopes and high powered rifles and fired into the transformers that uh, are very hard to replace, and they almost overheated the whole system, and they came within about 30 seconds of destroying that substation, and that would have taken most of Silicon Valley offline for months. And we're talking about Google, Facebook, uh, PayPal, all of those could have gone offline for months before they got those fixed. And it was only quick thinking of some of the people that were working at the substation who decided to go against policy, against the published policy, and risk getting fired by throwing the switch to shut the whole system down before it overheated and melted down for good. And they were able to, keep it to just a day or two of, disruption. Those guys that performed that attack then faded into the darkness, and were never seen again. They had the U.S. Navy SEALs look at that operation, and the Navy SEALs said, this is likely a special operations unit from some foreign country, not a foreign state actor like Iran or China or Russia that did this. And it was probably just a test. It was probably just a probe to see how easy it would be to take this stuff down. So we're not, in this case, talking about Antifa or some pipe cleaner neck geeks using their dad's deer hunting rifles because it was far too well planned and executed for some ad hoc group. And so that what that tells us is that our country is in the crosshairs. And what this documentary talks about is that our power grid is very fragile because it's old. We had one of the first nationwide power grids on planet Earth, and much of it has not been improved upon or replaced since it was initially put in the 1950s or earlier. So some of these ultra high voltage transformers, which are custom built, it's not like we have a store of these things somewhere that we could just replace them if they get wrecked. Some of these transformers, if they got destroyed, could take down either portions of the power grid or the entire thing for up to 2 years. And there have been studies done that if they took down the power grid for 18 months, you'd see millions of people in the United States dead because of the lack of power. That's how much we rely on the power grid these days. And so, it bears being prepared for that. You can be prepared for that, like I am, by investing in a generator, by investing in a solar generator, by having some backup plans, candles, light. What do you do for light? What do you do? How does your water supply work if you live out in the country? Are you on a well that requires power to run your pump? Do you have a backup method of getting water out of your well? Things like that. So uh, there have been so much asymmetric war that's come out of Russia that we've spent hours talking about it on this podcast. And we could go on and on and on. I mean, even just in the last few days, the cyber attack against the airlines and the ATC in Western Europe was likely caused by Russian hackers. I'd say there's about a 70% chance that it was Russian hackers. I would say there's probably a 50% chance that the outage that was experienced in the United States over the weekend was also due to Russian hackers. Now, in the US, they don't like to admit it when they get hacked. A lot of times they just rather eat it, keep it under wraps because they don't want to give these hacking groups the satisfaction and the publicity, and because it makes their liability go up, their insurance go up, they could get sued by their customers, and so on and so forth if it comes out that they've been exploited by a hacking group. So whether it's Russia, whether it's China, whether it's Iran, all of these countries have a vested interest in seeing more events like this happen in the West, whether it's cyber attacks, disinformation ops, you name it. North Korea had their WannaCry ransomware, which crippled hospitals all over the world. We just saw recently from the National Counterterrorism Center a report about that as well, and about the increasing calls for attacks on hospitals in the United States. So Cheryl Miller's asking about what to do on fixed income. I'll get to your question toward the end, so stick around, Cheryl. Uh, North Korea has also stolen billions of dollars in cryptocurrency, and that's how Kim Jong Un funds his missiles with, money that's hacked from your grandma's Wi-Fi camera or, laptop or something like that. Uh, so if you're wondering why every disruption gets blamed on technical issues, that's why. I mean, like I said, um, admitting a hack is going to be bad for stock prices. It's going to invite lawsuits. It's going to, you know, they're going to go very slow on attribution. Does that make sense? Intel agencies like to kind of keep those things under wraps because then they can potentially watch how the hackers are moving through networks and map that out and find ways to plug the holes more easily than they can if it gets blabbed all over the internet. Okay, so you get these euphemisms like network hiccup, glitch, service degradation. We've seen that on various different websites over the past few weeks and few months. Even Yemen is getting in on the game by trying to. They apparently cut some undersea internet cables off the shore of Yemen, and that dramatically slowed down web service to the region over there in the past month or so. So the grid, um, the network, I talked about the Metcalf substation. Um, in Ukraine, hackers from Russia have been constantly hitting them. You got to be very careful if you want to, for example, take money out of an ATM in Ukraine. Uh, they've not only been bombing the power substations all across Ukraine, but they've been remotely hacking into them, opening breakers, trying to plunge cities into winter blackouts. And people in Ukraine will tell you what a nightmare it is to have your bank account suddenly just offline for weeks at a time and not be able to get at any money. So, again, we're going to get into what you can do to protect yourself against these things. Um, and I don't know that there's much that we can do about, um, the internet blackouts, things like that, other than just, you know, don't be so reliant on the internet. Still have, have backups. Even the GPS system, which is run by satellites, not so much the internet, has been spoofed across Europe by Russia. It's been spoofed in the parts of the Middle East. It certainly has been spoofed in Israel, and you don't realize until you actually run into that how much you rely on GPS just to get around anymore. It's using Google Maps, using Apple Maps, using Waze or whatever, using Find My to find your loved ones or your devices or something like that. A lot of that stuff just relies on that GPS system, and bad actors are getting better and better at accidentally um, messing with those technologies. So, they're doing that to try to cause chaos in our communities. And, it makes me wonder, like, why does Russia bother trying to cut undersea cables um, for internet traffic? Are they just trying to be annoying? Because those things can be replaced. Those things, internet traffic can be rerouted. They're going to slow things down a little bit. Well, part of it is just retribution for the sanctions and the opprobrium that Russia has had to face since they invaded Ukraine. But in those internet undersea cables that they're cutting, they carry 95% of global internet traffic. You cut a few of those things, you don't just drop some Zoom calls, you isolate entire nations, and that gives Russia leverage. It's bullying, it's intimidation. It's Russia saying, we can do this anytime we want and make your lives miserable, right? So all of this is pointing toward, what is the next digital Pearl Harbor going to look like? I want to know, what we can expect in the future more so than what we're just looking at in the past. So we obviously it's possible we will see more airport snafus. Um, the system's frozen, and I'm I don't understand why airlines are not more prepared for things like this. I mean, every time this happens, it becomes very clear that airlines are far too reliant on these computerized systems, and they don't have any backups in place. So doing it with pen and paper just is not even an option anymore. A lot of that is because of the security protocols that are in place where they can track everybody that's traveling. Obviously, that gets a lot harder when the systems go down and they have to do it with paper tickets and stuff like that. And that is a potential vector for terrorism to take place in the United States. When these systems go down, and then the security systems are not as robust because they can't track everything, then that opens a window for terrorists to sneak in or to be able to move around or to be able to create havoc in other ways and not get tracked, right? They can do the same thing at ports across the United States. Container ports, obviously very computerized. Every single container is getting tracked, and they have to have a manifest of what's inside every one of those, and that's all in a database somewhere. Well, what happens when that database gets hacked and goes down? It creates openings for weapons to get shipped or explosives to get, transported into the United States, or human trafficking even that could happen. So, it also disrupts, har- you know, uh, um, grain deliveries and food deliveries and logistics across the United States. Those just in time logistics trains that we see in the United States that lead to there only being 3 days worth of food in any given city, for example. Uh, all of that is so reliant on these computerized systems staying up and running 99% of the time that when they go down, you could see a ripple effect that could cause serious disruptions in food, toilet paper, gasoline, whatever, heating oil across the United States and elsewhere in the world. So these are things that we've all got to prepare for. Because if you saw, what would you do if you live in a northern climate if there was a week-long blackout in your area? Are you reliant on electricity for your heat? Sometimes you say, well, no, I use I burn fuel oil for heat. Yeah, but does your furnace require electricity to burn the fuel oil? Do you have a backup method to heat your home if the electricity goes out? And, I mean, what's going to happen? Because people actually die when these things happen. The big thing that I have seen in practice, as I've reported on this around the United States for more than 2 decades, is that when there is the disruption, whether it's from a hurricane, fire, flood, earthquake, cyber attack, whatever, is that people run out of cash very quickly. We're getting so used to paying for everything with plastic, or even our phones or our watches, to use those things to pay for things. When those payment systems go down, you're talking no groceries, no gas. And so this is more than just an inconvenience for people. You're talking about more than just disruption, you're talking about destruction. And disruption at scale can be worse than dropping a bomb on your city. Those are things, though, that you can plan for. They are things that you can prepare for, and you definitely should be. So I just wanted to check, folks. We got almost more than 3,500 people watching. If you have not gone over to chuckholton.com, we're putting up lots of extra content over there. You can watch the full 30-minute documentary about our power grid. I'll put that up over there today, but you got to be a supporter over there to do that. And you're supporting the work that I do, keeping me out in the field, going, putting boots on the ground in conflict zones around the world and bringing you the ground truth of what's going on in all of these places. So if I highly recommend you go over to chuckholton.com and sign up over there, and make sure that you're subscribed to this channel as well. If you haven't subscribed to the Hot Zone yet, why not? I mean, it doesn't cost you anything, and you'll get notified when we're doing these live broadcasts, and you can get your questions answered on the daily podcast that we do like that. So I'll be answering questions here in just a minute. So stick around. If governments want to keep the lights on, this is what we need to push our representatives to do. First of all, we got to have resilience built into the system. Every critical sector has got to be able to prove that it can run offline for up to a week, let's say. So I'm talking military bases. You know, most military bases in the United States get the electricity that they need to run from the local power grid in that city. So they don't have backup systems for a lot of military bases in the United States. That's a huge red flag. That's a big problem. And U.S. military needs to be funded to become more resilient than the communities they serve, so that in an emergency, in a grid down, whether it's localized or generalized, the U.S. military can become a first responder in that situation. But right now, many of them would be just as vulnerable, just as dead, just as offline as everybody else. We've got to break these dependencies. No single vendor should be the Achilles heel for an entire industry. So we need to hunt down uh, third party or non or state or non-state actors that are already inside our various critical infrastructures, and they are. They are. China, without a doubt, has zero-day exploits right now that they're hoarding, where they're sitting inside our critical infrastructure, and they could take advantage of those at any time. We've got to put the resources into hiring white hat hackers to hack into our to red team our critical infrastructure, find those zero-day exploits and get rid of them, or turn them over to the US government. And that is something that the Trump administration has not yet put much emphasis on. As a matter of fact, they have cut funding to organizations that do that. They need to beef up that funding, and we need to push them to do so. We need to find ways to share intelligence faster. Right now, one of the big vulnerabilities is that the US government is very ponderous. They're very slow. There's a lot of bureaucracy and red tape involved in reacting to these things. Meanwhile, the hackers are footloose and fancy free, and they can react. They can hit us, and it'll take days, if not months, or even years for us to get everything back online because of the just the way that our system is so gummed up with bureaucracy. So as my friend uh, Ryan Macbeth points out, the US government should be treating these ransomware gangs and hacking gangs like absolute enemy armies that are attacking the United States. When they exploit a zero day in the United States, or when they make a cyber attack on U.S. infrastructure, like the power grid or the aviation system, that needs to be treated as an act of war. And we need to start going after these guys, because as I said, nobody has the jurisdiction to go after these guys. The U.S. needs to claim jurisdiction with our U.S. military and start dropping warheads on foreheads in Nigeria, in Moscow, whatever. And that might sound extreme, but you don't have to do that too many times before it becomes a serious deterrent, because people don't want to have to look over their shoulders for the rest of their lives, and a lot of people are going to quit doing this. Okay, we could do it in places like Nigeria. We could do it in places like Iran and Syria, and even North Korea. I mean, there are. We don't necessarily have to do it to inside Russia, but uh, we have a cyber command in the United States that could hit Russia where it hurts as well. And you can bet that if they've got zero-day exploits in the United States power grid, we could find zero-day exploits in their power grid as well. And we could take them offline big time at multiples, exponentially worse than what they could do to us if we put our minds to it, if we took the fetters off our cyber command and let them go kind of black hat for a while on Russia. Okay. Um, so, fixing the power grid is a longer term thing for us, but it is something that we really need to push our government to do. We need to build resiliency into our power grid. We need to start making our power grid more distributed and not more centralized. Okay. And there are great ways to do that. Ukraine is a perfect example because their main thermoelectric plants have been struck over and over and over again by Russia. What they've started to do is build small distributed power plants all over Ukraine that power one village or two villages or something like that. And it makes it, and they're all networked together. So if one gets hit, the other ones pick up the slack. And it's much, much harder for Russia to take down the power grid in Ukraine. We need to start thinking about our power grid with a wartime mindset, knowing that there are countries out there like Russia and Iran and China that are at war with us right now as we speak. That war is asymmetric, but it is real nonetheless. And so we need to start thinking about those distributed power grid options. There's tons of ways to do that. And it actually makes the power grid much more efficient. You don't have to have power lines because if you ship power from Texas to California because they need more power in California for their summer or whatever, you experience a lot of power loss. There's a lot of friction in those lines, and a lot of the power gets lost. So if you are putting distributed power generation networks in California that are on site in the neighborhoods that they serve, there is essentially no loss of power, and it's much, much more efficient. So that's something that uh, some of our politicians have been pushing for, and we need to be sending them messages and saying, we want a more resilient power grid. We need to get away from this 1950s style power grids, okay? What can you do? You can't fix a power grid around you, but here's what you can do. You can back up your important files offline. Print out the things that are most important to you. Keep paper copies of things that are most that could get lost and that you don't want to get lost. Now, it's important to keep digital copies as well, and keeping those things not on your hard drive on your computer, but in the cloud is a very good idea. So, for example, all of my important papers, um, tax returns and bank statements and things like that, get backed up on my computer and then get backed up onto a cloud server on Amazon S3. You can put them into deep glacier storage, so it's cheap. It doesn't cost much to do that. But then I can back all that stuff in an underground data center that has multiple redundant backups, that has multiple power sources, that's much safer than keeping it at my house. Now, I may get disconnected from that if the power grid goes down, and for that reason, I need at least some of that backed up in paper form. But you don't want it all to be in paper form, and you don't want it all to be in digital form. You want both, okay? When it comes to your accounts, I can't stress this enough. You need to increase your security online. If your password is, love 123 or if something like that. If it's the same password you've been using since 1994, you need to change your passwords. Try to do it every year. It's kind of hard to do because you have so many hundreds of passwords out there online. What I've started to do now is I've started to put very long passwords, like 36 characters long, on many of my accounts, and then tie those to my computer or my phone using either facial or thumbprint recognition. So I don't need to remember them. I do have them written down, but I don't need to remember them all the time. I don't need to type in passwords ever. I just use my fingerprint or I use my face to get on most things around the internet. And I also use multi-factor authentication as much as possible, where they have to send you a text message. I know it's a hassle, but think $9 trillion a year being stolen. Your chances of being a victim of online hacking or scamming is very, very, very high. It's higher than your chances of being in a car accident in your lifetime. So you can reduce that, as like getting an airbag for your car, by using multi-factor authentication. Okay, so make sure that your software is patched and updated. I mean, quit hitting remind me later every time it says, we have a new version of this software. Continue to update that stuff. And as we come down to the end of the year, be thinking about that, because I always try to do the last week of the year. I go and update everything, change my passwords, back everything up, and be ready for the new year. So be thinking about that and preparing for that as we go forward. You need to be suspicious of every link, every attachment, and every urgent message that comes from somebody you don't know. If you're like me, you get dozens, if not hundreds, of these things every day. I get sent, I mean, a lot of my viewers will send me files like, hey, take a look at this, thing I wrote, or hey, take a look at this video, and they send me the actual video. I don't open any. If you're sending an attachment to me and you're not my, on my best friends list, then don't bother, because I'm not going to open it. If you're saying, hey, there's a article I want you to read, tell me the place where the article is, tell me the name of the article, I'll go look it up myself. Or copy and paste it into the message that you're sending me. If you send me a link or if you send me an attachment, I'm not going to open it. And you shouldn't either, because that is how you get malware on your computer. That's how those spear phishing attacks, how they steal your passwords, how they steal your bank accounts and all that. And it is so prevalent these days. You cannot afford to click any link, attachment, or message from somebody you don't know, coming in from any source, not just email. Could be on your text messages. It could be, I mean, I get those every day. I get text messages saying, hello, just hello, from a number I don't know. And, so the temptation is to write back and go, who is this? Don't do that. Don't engage with those things at all. Okay. You immediately, if it's a number you don't recognize and they're sending you a text message, just delete and report it as junk mail and have it blocked from your phone. Okay. All of that comes into like going back to having a fallback plan. Have some cash on hand. More importantly, have some gold on hand, some way to function if systems go dark. I mean, there have been people I've seen in the comments here, people going by that have suffered through hurricanes and the aftermath and things like that, where they've literally been without power for weeks. Do you have enough cash on hand to get you through weeks? Uh, if you don't, then some gold or silver, having that on hand, might actually help. 1 ounce of gold, it's the size of a 50 cents piece, is worth almost $4,000 right now. You could buy a car with a gold coin if you needed to. Okay. And this is why I travel with a gold coin, just in case. Okay. So doesn't hurt to do that. And again, reserve gold, gold.com/hot zone is a good place to go to get your gold. Okay. So have some way to function for a while if systems go dark. When I wrote my book, Death of Civilization, if you haven't read that, go get it on Amazon or become a supporter on chuckholton.com and you can download a free version of it. But in my book, I detail how you can make your family, your community more resilient in what is coming, less uh, affected if there is political violence or loss of civilization, loss of civility around you. Okay, so get that book because it details. This is not your typical prepper book. Have some food saved up and stockpile ammo and all that. That's not what this is about. This is more about what relationships you should be cultivating right now to make you and your family safer. And it is based on U.S. military manuals for military setting up a forward operating base in a non-permissive environment. I recommend you get the book. It's called Death of Civilization, and maybe the mods can put a link to that on Amazon in the chat. Okay, so from airports to power substations, from the Baltic seabed to your local water plant, the pattern is the same. The enemies of the West, they don't need to invade us. They just need to cause death by 1,000 cuts. It gives them leverage. They use chaos as a weapon. And the question isn't whether another attack is going to come. The question is whether we prepare now for the inevitable attack that will come, maybe as soon as today. So please be prepared for that. Please take my recommendations to heart. Okay, let's go to your questions now. I got to go over to my little document here. Let's see. Where's my document? It keeps going further and further down my list here. There it is. Okay. Terry Shopaholic says banks down in the Netherlands, could it be related to cyber attacks? I didn't read about that, but it absolutely could be related to cyber attacks, and it probably is. I mean, that the likelihood of that being a cyber attack is very high, very high. Greg Maston says, it takes 4 years to replace a big transformer. Yes, it does. And they don't have backups because they're all custom built. And we don't make those in the United States. We have to get them from Brazil or South Korea or someplace. And it literally could take years. And in my documentary about that, we report on the fact that if terrorists took out 15 of those transformers around the globe, around the United States, the right 15 would take down the entire U.S. power grid for more than 2 years. And that would be catastrophic for America. Now, obviously, we're not putting out which 15 those are, but that is the what they say about how fragile our power grid is. Pieces Narrow says, in a fallen society, how do you pay with a gold coin? How do you divide the coin? Well, you don't. You probably don't want to be chiseling your coin into little pieces. There are silver coins that come pre-scored so that you can break pieces of them off to pay for things that aren't very much. And you should have some cash on hand to cover those things, or some silver on hand to be able to pay for groceries and things like that. You don't want to rely on a gold coin, especially a 1 ounce gold coin, to pay for groceries, because nobody's going to sell you $4,000 worth of groceries. I'm talking about paying for big stuff like a firearm or a car or something like that. I'm also talking about safeguarding your wealth and not seeing it all get drained away if your account gets hacked. If you have some of your wealth in physical gold and it's well secured in your home in a safe or whatever, then you are safeguarding at least a portion of your wealth, and that's important as you get older. Okay, so yeah, there are. I mean, I've got some 1/10 ounce gold coins. So that would be like, instead of $3,700, that'd be $370. for a 1/10 ounce gold coin, tiny, tiny little coin. And those are good gifts, by the way, to give to your grandchildren for their birthday or something like that. Just to help them start to build some wealth as well. But there are ways. A lot of people talk about junk silver. And I've had people try to pay me for things with junk silver. Not so sure about that, but silver is a good way to go. Because right now, a silver 1 ounce coin, which is about the size of a silver dollar, is what, about $44 or something like that. So you could buy some groceries with those. Having a couple 100 ounces of silver is not a bad idea at all, and I do that as well. I've been stacking silver for many years. Okay, Christine Tapanes. Hi, Christine. How's it going? You and many other podcasters are advertising gold and silver. How does it help us in a scenario which you stated? Well, I think that's what I just was getting to, is that there may come a point where ATMs don't work. That being the case, you may need some cash on hand. You may need some things that are easier to transport than large amounts of cash, like gold and silver. So just think of it as a store of wealth that you can hold in your pocket. Okay, there you go. Now, Elizabeth Wright says, is something brewing at Bagram? I don't remember Trump talking about it back until last week. Yeah, he hadn't really been talking about it until last week. He came out with that sort of cryptic message that we may be taking Bagram back. Well, I think he was just sort of testing the waters there to see how that would play with his base. Uh, for us to get Bagram back, we would have to either pay the Taliban or we would have to re-invade Afghanistan, neither of which is real popular with the American public. So I think he's probably going to let that one drop. Uh, I think it would be a great idea, personally. I think we should send Marines back into Afghanistan and retake Bagram Air Base and dare the Taliban to attack us, to come after us, because we could easily, do to them what we did the first time when we went in there in 2001. So, I wouldn't be against it, but I think most Americans would be. How do you feel? Do you guys feel like, let's run a poll? Do you guys feel like the United States should retake Bagram Air Base militarily? Yes or no? And maybe the mods can put up a poll about that. Okay, so and Leland Glenn asked about that too. So there you go. I answered that question. Ryan Pennington says, "What are the chances of them being successful with the pre-warning?" Not sure what you're talking about there. Um, being successful retaking Bagram or what? I'm not sure what you're talking about. Okay, Melissa Tate says, yeah, somebody in there, Mama Rissa is saying stock up on lead and brass. Part of investing in precious metals, in my opinion, is investing in the kind of precious metals that go into a 9mm or go into a standard sporting rifle. Why? Because the the government is doing what it can to make it more difficult for more expensive, let's say, for you to get ammunition. And so if you stockpile ammunition, it's probably the value of it will probably go up commensurate with gold and silver or even better. As a matter of fact, there's one money manager I know of who like manages hundreds of millions of dollars that put $40 million into ammunition several years ago as an investment and just put it in a warehouse because that stuff is durable. It lasts for years. And the value of it in the United States will likely continue to rise. And it's also easily divisible. So you could pay for groceries with ammunition probably easier than you could pay for groceries with silver or gold. So it's not a bad idea to invest in, even if you don't have a firearm in your house, even if you are not into shooting or anything like that, buy a couple boxes of 9mm and set them aside. Buy a couple boxes of 5.56 and set them aside. Those kinds of things could be very valuable barter items in an event. So it doesn't hurt to have them. I know if you're in the UK, that's probably a bad idea because it's probably illegal. But if you're in the United States, not a bad idea. Melissa Tate says, I've heard they only need 10 of these jihadist people in every state to cause an enormous amount of destruction. I totally agree. A massive multi-cell terror attack. We've seen examples of this. So, for example, in Mumbai, I think it was 2017 or maybe 2007, when they had that massive multi-cell terror attack there. They struck at multiple points around the city of Mumbai all at the same time. And they absolutely shut down the city. There was absolute gridlock, and even the police and first responders could not respond to these terrorist events in a timely manner because they couldn't get there. The traffic was just jammed up everywhere, absolute gridlock. And we could see a massive multi-cell terror attack in the United States that brought the United States to a standstill for a period of time. I mean, think about what happened. That is exactly what 9/11 was a massive multi-cell terror attack. They struck multiple points around the United States. They completely shut down the entire U.S. air traffic control system for more than 24 hours. And I mean that the costs of that went far beyond the 3,000 people who were killed that day, and went far beyond the even the trillions of dollars of costs, follow-on costs to the United States. But it cost a lot more lives because people were driving instead of flying, and driving is a lot more dangerous than flying is. So yes, it is probably a matter of time before that happens in the U.S. or in Western Europe. Okay, and like you say, you had 10 of these people in the United States that all did it at the same time. It could cause such a panic that they could shut everything down, and it could really cause some serious backups in the U.S. Um, Eight King says, I heard the UK is working with Hamas. Is this true? Well, the UK just announced that they are recognizing a Palestinian state. That certainly is going to serve to bolster Hamas and help Hamas have more leverage over any negotiations that take place with Israel. It's going to encourage Hamas to stick it out because they're getting more and more, they're getting what they want from October 7th. And it is very unfortunate to see even because the people in the UK, about 90% of the people in the UK do not want to um, see their government recognize the Palestinian state, but yet they did it anyway. So it's very unfortunate. Vape King also said, do the pink haired folks get that from college or high school? Get their pink hair from college or high school? Yeah. Public schooling is very dangerous for your children, toxic. Amber Lawhorn says, is Antifa the same as them or most likely working with them? There is a nexus between the far left Marxist, which is Antifa, the jihadists, which is Al Qaeda, and the environmentalist, which is Greta Thunberg and the Earth First movement and all that kind of stuff. There's a nexus there where you see those people all working for the same goals, and in some cases even working together, even though in some cases they have very divergent views on things like homosexuality or whatever. Um, the the trans Tifa, the jihadists, the Al Qaeda, ISIS nexus, and the radical uh, environmentalist nexus all are pushing for the same thing, which is the destruction of the Western system. So, yes. Um, Terry Alexander, who did they blame 9/11 on? I'm not sure who you mean by they. We know who committed 9/11. Please don't ever bring to my say anything to me about that it was an inside job or anything like that. I will ban you so fast because I don't broker those kind of ridiculous conspiracy theories. If you're one of those people who thinks 9/11 was an inside job, please stop watching right now. Unsubscribe. Never look at me again. Okay? I don't go there. Critical Mass System says, are the electrical transformers even made in America? No, they're not. Cheryl Miller says, James says, is anywhere safe? Safe is, I wrote a whole book about this. It's called Bulletproof. You can get that on Amazon if you'd like. It's one of my earlier books. But I think you work to make yourself as safe as possible. And if you might choose to vote with your feet and move to some place that's safer objectively than the place where you currently live. We did that. Choosing to live up here in the mountains of Panama was not a middle finger to America. It was the most patriotic thing I could do because it gave me the ability to vote that with more power, because I'm taking a large amount of money away from the federal government in terms of my tax dollars by moving out of the United States. But it also moves my family to a year-round growing season where we don't have to worry about heat or air conditioning, a place that is off the beaten path, a place where most people work on a barter economy already. And if the whole world fell apart, most people here wouldn't even notice. And that's what we saw during the pandemic here. So, you do what you can, right? Maybe you don't have the wherewithal to move out of the country to get a second passport or anything like that. That's fine. Do what you can. If you get my book, Death of Civilization, it will help explain that to you. There are things you can do without moving to another state, without buying a farm in the mountains of Idaho or something like that. There are things you can do to make your neighborhood right now where you live safer, and it has to do with building relationships more than buying ammunition. Cheryl Miller says, what do you suggest for those of us who are on a fixed income due to disability and are living check to check? Um, Read that book. Get that book. And if you can't afford to become a supporter at chuckholton.com, I've always said, send me an email, info@chuckholton.com, and I'll send it to you for free, because it's not about just making a bunch of money. Okay. I don't want to keep this information from people who can't afford it. If you can't afford it, I would appreciate it if you toss me a few bucks, to get it. But if you can't afford it, that's fine. I'll send it to you for nothing. Paul Howson says ATM in Ukraine, I thought they were being bombed. Yeah, but they still have electricity. They still have ATMs. I mean, in Kyiv and most of the big cities, they're full of people. There's millions of people. The banks are still open. The shops are still open. The restaurants are still open. You might be surprised what a war zone actually looks like. Okay. So there you go. Uh, Michael M says, if you had a choice of traditional cable versus Starlink, which has lower risk of outage? I've been using Starlink now for 6 months or so, and I'm very happy with it. Coming to you via Starlink right now. Uh, it does have its limitations, but so does cable. And I've found Starlink to be very dependable anywhere in the world, and that's really helpful. Ginger, Indiana says, I don't understand why they don't make LAN connections inside airports and hospitals. Uh, I mean, they are going to be connected to the internet. Just having a LAN connection probably wouldn't enable them to do what they do at hospitals. They usually keep their records off-site, et cetera, for the very reasons that I've explained, that you should have cloud backups for your stuff too, as well. Question, should we switch to small independent nuclear plants? Maybe not nuclear plants, but there are something called microturbine generators that I've been investing. I've used to tell my clients about when I was a stockbroker, and the microturbine generators can run on anything from diesel fuel to natural gas to methane gas to that's trash gas, the like they call it, anything. They're very efficient. They have almost no emissions. You could literally breathe off of the exhaust of that thing, and they run on air bearings, so they don't take a lot of maintenance. You have to change the air filter once a year, and that's about it. And they can be distributed all around. Very, very, very efficient way to build a distributed network. If you want to read more about that, go to Capstone Microturbine. Just look up Capstone Microturbine. CPST is what it used to be, the stock, and you can read more about how those work. They're amazing, and that is part of what they need to be putting in Ukraine and places like that. Okay. Question: how will any of this affect the Amish or Old Tradition Mennonites? Not much, because they don't use any of that technology. Chuck, have you heard about people making diesel and household gas from? Can say on here, but let's just say we can clean the ocean up. Um, I've heard about people making diesel out of cooking oil and used motor oil. I even at one point bought a filter to do that with on my farm and then got like 300 gallons of used motor oil. And my plan was to make diesel fuel out of it. And then I never did that because I moved to Panama. Uh, so whoever wrote Capstone Microturbine, there's an E on microturbine. Uh, but other than that, you're correct. Capstone Microturbine, there's an E on microturbine. Okay. So that may be Connie that put that out there. But yeah, there are ways that people are making diesel fuel out of used motor oil and cooking oil and things like that. Lance Lambrak says, "Do you believe Ilhan Omar, AOC Teresa? No, it's Rashida Tlaib should be removed from Congress and the Senate." I'd love that, but they got duly elected. So if we can find a reason to remove them, like Ilhan Omar lied on her, immigration forms or something, then yeah, definitely should. But I think that's going to be a pretty high bar, pretty difficult to do. And they're not in Congress. They're not in Senate. Those guys are all Congress people. Larry Wilson says, "Are there any leaders pushing for these smaller utility units?" I've heard a couple of them talk about making the grid more resilient, but I don't know if that's gone very far because it would be expensive to do so, and we're already spending way too much money. The Trump administration is about scaling back the scale of government, and I'm on board with that. I like that, but sometimes they throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak. Renee says, seriously, do you not think the government already knows all these things you're talking about and have plans, just aren't informing the public so other countries are kept in the dark too? I know the government knows about the fragility of the power system, but again, are they willing to spend the money to do it? And that's where the rub is right there. Thank you, Mary. Very kind of you. Terry Johnson says, do you think what the government has underground places to live will only be for rich and elite if anything bad happens? Yeah, they can't fit everybody in those underground bunkers that they have in various places. Uh, so, yeah, of course, they're going to be only for the elite in the government, and that's all. Lori W says, "Look, if we experience a generalized loss of civility in America, whether that's a power outage or whatever, an attack of some sort, you're on your own, folks. That's all there is to it. If Wi-Fi is commonplace, but in your opinion, how safe is it? I don't personally use it because of the hacker concerns. If you're talking about public Wi-Fi, Lori, I try not to use public Wi-Fi as much as possible, and if I do use it, thank you, Mary. Wow, that's very nice. If I do use it, I use a VPN, and I would recommend a VPN. We've recommended several on this show. Chris Palacios says, "Do you think iCloud is safe?" Yeah, I do. iCloud is pretty well secured. Apple products, by and large, are very well secured. Amber Lawhorn says, "The apps we use for our brokerage account, like Robinhood or Fidelity, are they able to get hacked? How can we avoid anything like that?" I mean, it depends on how extreme you want to get at protecting yourself. You can go as far as, I know people who they buy one laptop, they put no software on it, just like a Chromebook or something like that. And the only thing they do on that laptop is access their bank accounts and brokerage accounts online. That's the only thing they do with it. And then they keep it in a safe. They pull it out. They access and that's one way and they do it through a VPN on their home network only. They don't travel with it or anything like that. I don't go that far. I think that I feel like Apple products are safe enough, and I use exclusively Apple products. And so I use multi-factor authentication. I use my face and my fingerprint and things like that to get into my bank accounts and stuff, and put very, very long passwords on them and change them fairly regularly. That's about the best you can do. Tara H says, how much do you suggest to have on hand? Um, what kind of breakdown? You're talking about cash. It depends on what you can afford. I mean, ideally, $25,000 in cash would be ideal for you to have on hand. That's going to get you through several months of major disaster before you have to start going to other means. I know that's out of the realm of a lot of people's possibilities. So the question is, what can you afford? $2,500. If you can only do $2,500, then or $250. You put aside what you can put aside in cash, in a safe, someplace, someplace that's safe, and you do want to have some denominations that are lower than 100. We here in Panama, we have to use cash a lot more than we do in the States. And so I bring down cash when I'm flying down to Panama in $20 denominations because it's easier to pay people around here with 20s than it is with hundreds. So um, can we talk about the EMP elephant in the room? Well, EMP is one way that we could be attacked by state actors, and that could cause a massive, massive problem. Chuck, how much do you sleep? Betsy Anderson asks, I try to get a lot of sleep, actually. I try to sleep 8 hours a night. I don't always get 8 hours a night. Actually, if I track my sleep, so I have an app on my phone and I wear this Apple Watch Ultra when I sleep at night and it tracks my sleep. And so for the last few days, last night I got 8 hours and 20 minutes of sleep. That was a good night. The night before, 7 hours and 11 minutes. The night before, 8 hours and 51 minutes. The night before that, 6 hours. The night before that, 6 hours and 42 minutes. The night before that, 8 hours and 17 minutes. The night before that, 2 hours and 6 minutes as I was on airplanes. The night before that, 2 hours and 14 minutes. I went 2 days with only 2 hours sleep a night. So I probably sleep more than you think I do. I think it's very important. It's every bit as important to get lots of sleep as it is to work out every day. And so I make that a real priority in my life. Um, Nyone says, I'm a supporter. Can I get your book like listening because I'm a driver? Uh, Depends on which book. I don't have all my books on audio, but I have some of them on audio. And if you are a paying supporter, I'd be happy to send you one of them for sure. Just send an email to info@holtonnews.com and we'll get you a link to download the book. Ron A says, when do you expect USA to move to CBDC? That's a digital currency. I think it will happen. It may happen during the Trump administration, but we'll see. There are some barriers to that have to be overcome first. Kathy Humphreys says, have you heard about Vietnam going total digital? I have heard about that. And there are other countries that are talking about going completely digital, and that will become the standard. It won't, sometime at some point, all countries will be totally digital. And this is pointing right at the book of Revelation. This is the mark of the beast and the one world currency and all that that's how you see it happening right there. Caleb Barnes says, how about nuggets of gold? Probably not. Nobody's going to say, oh, look, you've got your filling that you pulled out of your tooth. Great. I'll give you money for that. Not a good idea. Would be better to get standardized units of measure like gold coins. Kelsey Caswell says, Chuck, how do I discuss this with my family when they refuse to accept anything like this could happen? Well, send them articles about when things like this do happen in other places, like what just happened in Europe, like what happened, somebody said, in Denmark or someplace. How are you going to pay someone with your gold bar? Around here in Panama, the all of the grocery stores are owned by Chinese people, and they would love gold and silver. They would love that. They would love to trade in gold and silver. I think that we need to start buying gold and silver and trading with people when we buy something out of the newspaper or off Facebook Marketplace or something, offering them gold and silver instead of fiat currency for biblical reasons and for practical reasons, because we want to normalize that form of trade. Again, we want to make that more kind of ubiquitous. Okay, but we got to start doing it if we want it to be normal. Carbon Lux says, how soon do you think this attack can take effect? Could be today. I mean, these things could happen very quickly. Carbon Lux says, when did you hear this information? Last night, yesterday. Rita Myberg says, was Charlie Kirk's death not already the beginning of asymmetrical warfare? Yes, Charlie Kirk's death was an event in an asymmetric warfare, for sure, that the left is waging on the right in America. I said, as I talked about that, is that you could make a case that we are already seeing an armed insurrection or an armed insurgency in America by the political violence that's taking place. Not just Charlie Kirk, but the United Health CEO and the Democratic politician up in Michigan, who was, as it turns out, killed by a Democrat. Okay, so yes, I think that is asymmetric warfare. Critical System says, I don't know much, Starlink. Is it affected by weather? Not very much, actually. It's very rare. The Starlink I have on my roof, we're in the rainy season here. We get massive rainstorms every day, and it barely slows down my internet at all. There are times when they have problems, but not like I had with my cable internet system, which I had here in Panama. Mary Sinclair says, is New Zealand safe? Yeah, it's a pretty safe country. Carla S. says, do you think President Trump will strong arm Bibi behind the scenes to agree to a two-state solution? Nope, I don't. I don't think that there's going to be a two-state solution. Bibi has said, not going to happen. We're not going to do that. All right, folks, we just went over an hour and a half. We're going longer and longer on these things, but I love it that you guys are engaging, and I'm willing to engage right back. So I don't have any problem going for an hour and a half if you guys are into it, because I'm into it as well. So there's a lot to talk about, obviously, a lot going on, and I appreciate all of you. We do make condensed versions of each of these lives, and we put them up after about 24 hours on my YouTube channel. So if you don't have an hour and a half to watch the whole thing, you can watch a 15-minute condensed version of it, as long as you don't mind the jump cuts. I highly recommend you make sure you're subscribed to the channel. You go to chuckholton.com and become a supporter over there, get lots of extra content. Thank you very much for watching. We appreciate all of you very, very much, and pray for America, folks. America needs it. God bless you. We'll see you next time.